to in-house counsel and in-house legal professionals from all across North America and the world. Welcome to In-House Connect. My name is Shai Mahani. I'm the CEO and co-founder of In-House Connect, and I'm thrilled to have you with us today. Thank you for spending your breakfast time or your lunchtime with us, and special thanks to our wonderful sponsor, Recital, and our fantastic presenters today, Martin Ertl and Stephen Brickley, who are going to teach us, who believe that your contracts are a gold mine, and they're going to teach us how to turn contract data into a strategic asset. I'm thrilled for this webinar. It is our 44th webinar of the year, and I'm wondering, are you here for the first time or have you tuned into an IHC webinar before? We're thrilled to have with us today Martin Ertl and Stephen Brickley. Martin is the founder and CEO of Recital. He's a former lawyer and general counsel, where he previously founded Contractually, which brought contracts into the cloud before being acquired by Coupa, where he held. Today, Martin is focused on building tools that free legal teams from the grind of contract drudgery so they can spend more time on their more valuable work. He's joined by Stephen Brickley, who is the founder of DeusXM, not DeusXM, DeusXM, a consultancy centered on growing AI-enabled SaaS companies, and he has led customer revenue and legal ops at several technologies companies. Most recently, he was the customer success at a major CLM provider, helping enterprise clients unlock contract data to feed critical business operations. Currently, he is connecting corporate legal, procurement, and revenue leaders with innovative contract AI solution providers. Okay, we have a great program today. I'm going to turn things over to Martin to get us started. Martin, take us away.
Thanks, Shai. Really appreciate those introductions. And we're going to kick things off with an initial poll question about what do folks most want to know about their contracts. And while people are responding to the poll, I'll just give a big thank you to everyone for joining us today. Really appreciate it. We've got some really interesting things to talk about and hopefully provide some new ways of thinking about not just contracts, but the data that is in your contracts. All right, Shai, I'm not sure if you can share the results of the poll, but it looks like the answer is all of the above.
So just to recap the poll, what do you want to know about your contracts? What do you most want to know about your contracts? We have all of the above was an answer, and that has an overwhelming 61%, but followed by which clauses tend to cause negotiation friction, that's 14%. Which terms are non-standard, that's 10%. Key dates is 8%, and whether a signed version exists and where to find it is 6%. All right, back to you, Martin.
Thanks, Shai. Let me set the stage for some discussion between Stephen and myself here. The poll question, I think, set an indication of some of the problems that legal departments, legal ops, and businesses generally have with contract data in the sense of identifying and extracting and accessing their contract data. And I've been working in the area of contract management and contract negotiation software for over 15 years now. And it's interesting looking back that the problems 15 years ago are still with us. Folks have an intuitive sense of the data they'd like to get out of their contracts. So basic things like party names, type of contract, payment terms, when does the contract expire, what are the renewal terms, and so forth. But the problem remains, how do you actually get that out of contract documents? And what I see in the market today is it remains a big barrier to implementing various kinds of contract solutions. It's one of the reasons that implementing a contract lifecycle management, a CLM, for example, is so time consuming and so expensive. And one of the things that we'll be talking about today is not just what kinds of data can be really valuable in contracts for the legal department and for the business as a whole, but also identifying that there are solutions on the market now. Recital is one of those solutions that can actually help get at that data automatically without all of the manual work that historically it takes to get at this kind of information. And that opens up some really interesting opportunities for the legal department and for the business, and particular for legal to play an even stronger role in enabling the rest of the business with the valuable data and contracts. Stephen, How do you think about contract data, and how have you seen it be so valuable to the business as a whole, not just to the legal department?
Yeah, for sure. I think one thing that you and I were talking about before is that unlike a lot of other data assets in an enterprise, contracts really contain ground truth. It is the actual definitive record of what was agreed to by the parties. They negotiated with respect to allowed price increases and entered into Salesforce, or not what a procurement vendor manager thought he or she negotiated in terms of transition services obligations. It's the actual real fundamental ground truth. And that is a fundamental asset that I think increasingly people are looking at trying to unlock that information and get it into the operational systems throughout the rest of the organization where it can be analyzed and operated on and drive actual business processes. And I think we're not just talking about like some of the basic metadata that you mentioned, like counterparties and effective dates and agreement types, right? That's very basic. That is now a bit broader to specific liability caps or notification periods for termination in number of days, something very specific. Penalties for missed service level agreements. All of this type of data is frequently found in the contract and needs to flow into other operational systems where it can be actioned on. That's like kind of the core value that we can provide to the rest of the organization.
You're right. It's not just about basic data like dates, payment terms, and so forth. And it's actually one of the challenges in accessing contract data is that a lot of the data in contracts is not stated explicitly. It has to be interpreted. And this is one of the things that's required a lot of human manual effort up until now. So one of the things that we talk about at Recital is data that is derived or inferred from various clauses in the contract. And one of the examples I like to talk about is renewal dates. Figuring out the renewal date and terms for a contract is actually pretty complex because contracts don't usually contain a nice, neat clause that says the contract renews on this date and it's an auto renewal or it's not an auto renewal. Humans can figure all that out, but we're just getting to the technology now that can actually figure out the term of the contract, and from that, the expiry date, and from that, the renewal date, which is the same, and whether it auto renews, and create structured data, which is what is important. Tell us about your views about structured data and why that is so important.
Yeah. Yeah. So I come from a bit of a systems integration and IT oriented background. I shouldn't be writing code. I'm definitely not a coder, but I've definitely helped organizations try and figure out how to integrate their CLM platforms into their overall data architecture. And a lot of that has to do with flowing that data into other systems in their ecosystem. And when we talk about structured data in that sense, we're not necessarily talking about, say, extracted clause that concerns renewal, but we're actually looking for the date, the number of days in advance the notification has to go out, and so forth. When that's structured into data fields that have types, actual date fields and actual number of days or dollar amounts and so on and so forth, that really facilitates that information then flowing into other systems where it can be operated on. So it's very different to have just a list of your contracts. A different would be having the dollar amount caps and so forth, right? That can be sorted, it can be filtered. Other systems can digest that kind of information. And I think that's where a lot of the value comes. You think about like for a customer success, sales, or account management organization, they need that renewal date and the notification date for a non-renewal or something like that as a field in their gain site or churn zero or whatever, Salesforce, Soho, et cetera. The finance organization needs the payment terms extracted specifically into invoice and all their downstream systems. Your tech support organization may need to know the specific service level agreement metrics, the turnaround time that's been guaranteed in the contract, so that they can operationalize that in Zendesk or whatever their system of record is.
Excellent. And I want to touch even more on some of the other insights that can be gathered from contracts. But let's move to our second poll question here. And let's ask everyone who's joined us, what other teams in your company would benefit from access to contract data?
I think we have to take all of the above out of our
Yeah, out of our answers.
questions. But for now, it looks like they wanted, there's multiple teams. So sales has 7%, finance, customer success, interestingly enough, has 0, which I wouldn't expect. But again, 90%
All
of
under it, all of the above.
all of the above.
Yeah.
All right, back.
Thanks, Shai. And Stephen, just picking up from your last point about what's valuable for other teams within an organization, I want to touch briefly on how much value there still is in contract documents for the legal department itself, not just from individual contract documents, which is the first thing that we think about. What are the payment terms? When does this agreement end? Can it renew? We worry about due diligence. From a due diligence perspective, what are the limitations of liability? What are non-standard terms? And one of the things I think people have been wanting to do for a long time, and again has now become possible with machine learning and AI, is the ability to actually access insights, not just from individual contracts, but from the entire history of an organization's contracts. So it's now possible to answer questions quickly without months of analytical and professional services work. It's possible to get at insights like what clauses in my sales contracts cause the most friction. And with that kind of information, it opens up opportunities to streamline templates and accelerate negotiations to close customer deals, which in turn drives revenue for the company. So that's one example where legal can take on a role, not just in terms of providing legal advice, but actually providing data that is extremely strategic to the rest of the organization. And just to touch on another couple of examples similar to that, one of the things that most legal departments want to do is improve their templates, create a clause library, create playbooks. With the tools now available, it's now possible to actually create at least a draft clause library that can be available to your entire legal department, and possible in turn to start to create playbooks, at least to have a first cut at a playbook from what your company has actually negotiated in the past. No doubt there's improvements that you would want to make at that point, but at least you have a starting point for getting at that kind of valuable information. And it's data-driven information. You can choose to do what you want with it, but fundamentally it's coming at from what your organization has actually done when negotiating contracts previously.
I think there have been technologies available for some years now that are traditional machine learning based and NLP based and so forth that maybe a lot of the audience has actually had exposure to or used. But to get at some of the derived data that you've talked about was really only available to enterprises that had a fair amount of money to spend on both the underlying technology, but also the human validation and derivation steps. And that can eclipse the cost of the underlying technology, the human intervention necessary. We're pressing down now on the level of human intervention necessary. I'm thinking about one client I was working with had 60,000 or so vendor agreements. They were doing a major cost-cutting initiative. They needed to know which ones had termination for convenience, what the termination notice was, and what their annual contract values were. And it wasn't a question of evaluating individual vendors, although that happened eventually, but it was building out their workflow around evaluating the entire portfolio and targeting specific groups. Well, they needed to do that in an analytics platform. They had a really hard time getting that contract data out because some CLM vendors maybe don't want you to pull that data out, but they had to engage a service provider, actually 2 different ones, to fetch that data and put it in a way that the people planning the cost-cutting initiative and the procurement organization could really analyze it and make use of it and come up with a strategy for how they were going to rack and stack their vendors and approach these difficult conversations. That the cost of that was more than the actual underlying software price, the actual human intervention to do all that. It has been historically possible, but expensive and time consuming.
Yeah, so one of the things that's becoming possible now is for smaller organizations to be able to get at the data that it was only possible to get with with a large expense that perhaps was only justified in very large organizations previously. But now the technology and the capability to get at contract data and insights in contracts is becoming available to mid-sized and small organizations as well. Let's go to our third poll. What's been most challenging about getting contract data?
It's interesting to see the options roll in. Stephen, what do you think, ignoring the polls, what would you think is the most challenging? Or
I do think that knowing in advance the data that you're going to need to get in the future, that can be really difficult. Different business conditions, different initiatives, and so on and so forth may require us to answer a whole different set of questions. And you need a solution that's customizable enough that you don't have to know a priori everything that you're ever going to want to extract from a contract. You need a flexible platform where when the business need arrives, you can customize it and get that data.
got it. It's interesting. So Dennis is chiming in and saying Dennis is honoring his vote. Delays with internal communication issues from sales on closing. Melissa, hey Melissa, she says that she thinks that the emotional objection that people form logical arguments around is always time and cost. That it's like too expensive and too costly to pull out. Looking at our poll, we have a clear winner that it takes too long or costs too much, and that's exactly what Melissa said, followed by finding all of our contracts and then knowing what data to extract and worrying about doing it wrong is third. And then we tried with the vendor, but they didn't deliver. That's 5%. Over to you. All right, back to you, Martin and Stephen.
Very quickly on that point about getting buy-in. Stephen, I know that you've been thinking about how does the legal department, not only how can it provide more value to other teams within the business, but your thoughts on how they can also get buy-in and maybe
Yeah.
even money.
It's interesting because in some of those like larger CL implementations that I've been involved in, there's very complicated business case justification that has to go to the CFO ultimately to justify the spend on what might be considered a tool for the legal department. But in fact, since the data that is in those contracts is relevant across the organization, trying to pull in folks from the finance side or the sales side that need to be consumers of this information to help them contribute to the funding, for example, or justify the investment, can defray that cost a little bit and spread it around a couple of different departments and help you get funding for you want the latest and greatest technology in the legal organization, but sometimes partnering with some of your compatriots in the other departments, because you can provide them some advanced data through interfaces and so on, can help them justify the overall spend.
Excellent point.
Yeah.
And one of the kinds of tools that's become very available on the market is chatbot tools. How do you think about that when it comes to contract data?
Yeah, no, I think it's obviously like atop of everybody's mind for several years. And I'm sure there's tons of people on the call that are using ChatGPT and Claude, or maybe even some more legally focused ones like Harvey or GCAI. But the interaction there is essentially like interrogating individual contracts or asking questions and so forth. They're not necessarily the same kind of conversation that two systems have with each other, where you're trying to build a systematic flow of structured data into other applications. Those integrations work in a different way through a different pattern, essentially, than a chatbot does. So if you're actually trying to get all of the renewal dates and all of the notification periods for all of the customer contracts into a sales and account management platform, it needs to be done via an actual integration. Same thing would go for allowed increases in a commercial contract to get into your CPQ system or your RevOps application and so forth. The chatbot stuff is very promising and very useful, but it doesn't really solve the problem of flowing that data in a systematic way into other platforms in the overall data architecture of the organization.
And just extending that point a little bit, I want to leave a little bit of time here to show Recital and talk about how Recital is addressing some of these problems. But on the topic of data flow, one of the concerns I've heard a lot about from prospects and customers is not just flowing data into other applications, but what if you want to get your data out
Yeah.
contract system?
Yeah, I think as you're considering or starting to work with contracts platform, you want to have data portability like kind of top of mind from the beginning. There's a very good business reason for doing that, but it doesn't necessarily serve the client's needs. And it's not just necessarily about protecting yourself against, future change of platform and not being able to get your contracts and contract data out. But even if you're divesting part of the business or something like that, and you need to move a set of contracts to the divested entity, there's other use cases essentially that don't really have to do with changing out a vendor, where data portability remains important. So I'd say two things. One is make sure you get your IT folks involved and make sure that you understand how you can get metadata, extracted metadata out of the platform to feed other operational systems. And that's not just the contract itself, but the actual extracted metadata. And it's get them involved, not just from an InfoSec parsing perspective, but also how is this going to fit into our integration architecture, and we can ensure that data flows and there's no limitations, and whether they're contractual or technical or otherwise, you want to vet that up front and have it front of mind.
It's not just about the ability to get your documents out of a contract management system. It's getting at the metadata. And on the theme of this whole webinar, it's getting at other data that the system may have created, may have derived or calculated, or insights that the system has provided from individual contracts and from your historical contracts as a whole. So thinking about data portability now is becoming a broader concept as our concept of data itself is expanding with AI tools. I want to shift gears a little bit and tell folks a little bit about Recital and how it's addressing some of the problems that we're talking about here. Overall, Recital is a simplified contract solution for corporate legal departments. It spans your contract repository, your negotiations, and your contract reviews. And one of the key things about Recital is that it processes your contracts, your historical contracts, your in-flight contracts, and it automatically creates a contract repository with key data and clauses extracted. In turn, that makes suggested clauses available to you in Microsoft Word as you're reviewing a contract and redlining it. And even more than that, it provides a clause library that you can share with your colleagues in the legal department, again, available directly in Microsoft Word. And Recital comes with built-in connectors to all the common cloud storage systems, so things like SharePoint, OneDrive, Google Drive, Box, and so forth, and to email, because of course, email negotiations typically involve sending Word documents or PDFs back and forth. And there can also be a lot of historical contracts that are trapped in email, so Recital can get at those. And one of the things I'll emphasize is that Recital can be adopted in a matter of days, not weeks, and certainly not months like many traditional contract management solutions. So here's an illustration of what Recital is doing under the hood. The Recital data engine can take in unstructured data like Word documents, like PDFs, like emails from wherever they are in your organization. And very specifically with direct connectors to cloud storage like SharePoint, OneDrive, and so forth, it means that Recital can actually find your contracts for you without your organization doing upfront work to find those contracts and to organize them. All the things that previously had to be done to prepare contracts for a contract management system, Recital can do automatically. And as it's processing documents, it's deduplicating, it's detecting signed contracts, it's mapping versions of every negotiation, and very critically, it's actually mapping parent-child relationships. So relationships between a master document and amendments, order forms, and so forth. And the result of the processing by the Recital data engine is enabling Recital's contract review and contract management capabilities. It also enables structured data to be available and to flow to other destinations within your company. So to finance, to sales, to procurement, and potentially to business intelligence tools and other teams. So let's have a quick peek at Recital in action. I'm just going to change screens here. And Stephen, if I can just do a quick check with you, if that you're seeing a Recital sign-in screen.
Not yet. Still have our slide. There we go.
Excellent. Thank you. So what I want to show everyone here is how easy it is to get started with Recital, creating an account, and actually getting your contracts processed very quickly. So I'm going to create an account here. There's various ways to sign in. You can sign in with your existing Microsoft or Google credentials. Here, I'm going to sign in as Elise. And I've now created my Recital account. There's some quick steps that I would normally do to connect my cloud storage, connect my email, install an add-in for Outlook or Gmail, and install an add-in for Word. But what I want to show here is simply how easy it is to connect cloud storage, in this case, Google Drive. And sorry, this is taking a little bit longer than usual. There we go. Standard Google authorization. And now all I have to do is pick folders or directories that I want to connect to Recital and where I might have contracts. I don't have to organize any files. I don't have to worry about that. I can just pick any folders, click connect. And now I've connected my Recital account to my Google Drive. As I'm looking at my records in Recital, of course, there's nothing yet because we just created the account and just connected cloud storage. But you can see Recital's already going to work to detect contracts, and Recital can distinguish between contracts and non-contracts. It's deduplicating files. It's grouping versions together. So you can see that for the services agreement, Recital's finding different versions of that. It is looking for signed agreements, which it's going to mark as signed. It's mapping relationships between master agreements and order forms. And it is, in general, organizing all my contracts. A couple of takeaways here. One, this is the kind of tool that is now available that allows an organization to get started really quickly without a lot of upfront work. Typically, this is a kind of system that might take 6, 9, or 12 months plus to implement, specifically because of this step of finding and organizing your contracts before you can migrate them to a contract solution and before you can start to see any value. The top answer was the cost and the time. Recital is dramatically reducing the time and the cost. More than that, it's actually enabling you to find your contracts without manual work. That's one of the steps that's often overlooked when considering contract management solution. Is it's not just about preparing everything to be migrated to the contract solution. It's about finding all the contracts in the first place. And Recital has solved that problem simply by having direct connections to your common cloud storage systems. So I won't belabor the point here. I'm going to switch to another account, which is already populated with agreements and documents. And we can see, for instance, this master subscription agreement. And Recital's detected that it was executed, and it's still in the process of finding those and extracting data. Now, this is an account that's already populated with documents and with contract data. And what we're looking at here is a record for a master subscription agreement. And everything you're seeing on this screen has been automatically extracted and organized by Recital. So the name of the agreement, the party names. Recital detected that this contract was executed, meaning it was fully signed. So we have the agreement here that we can look at, and we can see it was fully signed, in this case with ink signatures. Recital can detect ink signatures and electronic signatures. And very importantly, it can tell not just if it's signed or unsigned, but if it's only partially signed. Recital also extracted the effective date. Recital keeps a link or a pointer to the source of this document. So here Recital's telling me that it found this agreement in email. If it had been found in Google Drive or SharePoint, I would see icons for those locations as well. And then very importantly, and actually very uniquely, Recital has organized related or child records under this master agreement. So I can see there's amendments and an order form here. And functionality to link records together like this exists in most, if not all, contract management solutions. The difference with Recital is that mapping is done automatically. Recital is also detecting and extracting key clauses. And the direction that we're going in is even stronger than that. I'm going to move back to my slide deck very quickly here. So here's what we're going to be releasing within 2 weeks. So beyond simply extracting clauses, we're going to be showing structured data from all your contracts. So these are just some examples on the screenshot, but getting at renewal dates. But more than that, answering questions like, does this contract automatically renew? And what notice do I have to give if I want to avoid the auto renewal? And as Recital is showing that data, Recital will also explain and provide a citation from how it calculated or how it derived that data. So you can actually check the accuracy of the data for yourself with an easy to access citation to the underlying clauses in the agreement. And within about 30 to 45 days, we'll be releasing capabilities for reporting within Recital, where you can actually search and filter for contracts that meet certain criteria. So for example, contracts that have a renewal date in the next 60 days. And with that, you can choose to include various other columns of data or clauses. And very importantly, on the topic of data flow and data portability, you'll be able to download a spreadsheet of all of this data. And I want to emphasize at this point that Recital is fundamentally premised on ensuring that not only you can flow structured data to other applications, but that you can take your data, and not just your documents, but your actual data, including data that Recital has extracted or derived for you. I want to show one other result of what you can do with Recital. So we're now looking at Microsoft Word and seeing a document where Recital has provided a comparison between two versions of a document. And Recital supports working in your tools as much as possible. That means working in Outlook and Gmail. It means working in Word. So as you open up a comparison from Recital in Word, you can select any clause in the document you're reviewing. It populates the search box. I click search. And what Recital returns to me are clause suggestions from my own company's historical documents. The results here fundamentally come from the Recital data engine, because as it's processing contracts, Recital is also parsing those contracts into their constituent clauses. and mapping relationships between the meaning and types of clauses. So when I talk about having clause suggestions, this is it. But this can actually be used as the basis for a clause library. So in this case here, if I toggle this to show only clauses from my shared clause library, I can narrow down the alternative clauses here to ones that are preferred or standard for my organization. And I can easily save or unsave clauses from the shared library. I can very easily add to my clause library by importing templates or Word documents of preferred clauses, and then those become available to me and to my colleagues in the legal department. So that's some of the power of Recital in terms of not just extracting data for contract management, but extracting insights from historical contracts that can be used to facilitate, to accelerate reviews and negotiations. And we're taking this even further than what's possible today. And we've hinted at that in our webinar. But you can imagine that with this data, we can also start to provide even more sophisticated clause libraries and even the start of playbooks generated from your historical contracts. So that's a quick overview of Recital. And summarizing all of that, Recital helps you get at the goldmine that is in your contracts. And beyond the traditional types of metadata that you've thought about, it also actually enables you to get quickly and automatically at even more powerful insights that can accelerate your contracts, which in turn allows you to provide even more value to the rest of the business. We can show you, and I hope I've given you a quick, useful demonstration of Recital. So we're offering a trial at no charge of Recital until May 23rd. That will include everything you've seen here. So it'll include a taste of creating your repository. We're not going to promise to create your entire repository, especially if you have tens of thousands of documents, but we'll process about 1,000 documents. And so you can see the results of Recital. And one of my colleagues, Rasan, who I think has been answering questions in the chat, is going to post the link that you can use, the URL that you can use to start your trial. If you have any questions, you can also email us. I think Rasan will share contact information. I know Shai will follow up with contact information after the webinar, so we'd be happy to answer questions.
All right, awesome. So we have one more poll, which I'll put up, and a couple of things. Great job, Martin and Stephen, on the presentation. And thank you to our chat, which has been, really chatty. So we have a bunch of questions. First, is Recital HIPAA compliant?
I think that the candid answer has to be no. We have our SOC 2 certification. We actually have a large customer who's a healthcare network and operator of about 15 hospitals. So they've gone through their security vetting process and InfoSec process. One of the things that they determined is that they did not expect to have any information, any personal health information that would be stored in the system. And I think the answer to that might be different for different customers, but that's certainly the conclusion they came to as they use Recital for contract management for primarily their vendor contracts.
How is the data protected? Does it ever leave the environment? And do you use the data to train your own AI?
Lots of great multiple questions there. Quick summary on information security. Recital is SOC 2 certified. It also holds the Google CASA certification. We host primarily on Amazon Web Services in the United States. We have more detailed security information that we can provide. We do not delete any data from customers' cloud storage accounts. We have not used any customer data to train AI models. We've built one of our own models that uses non-customer data for it to work. In the future, we may use customer data to train models, obviously with explicit customer consent, but only in cases where the data would not identify a customer. So in particular, and what we're talking about there is using numeric values only that would contain no private or sensitive customer information.
Yeah. Recital can look at local drives instead of the cloud, right?
Not yet, but by the end of June, the answer will be yes.
Okay.
I think there's probably two questions there. Yes, for Recital to function, it has to be pointed to a directory or a folder on a cloud storage system. You can absolutely upload documents from your local storage for comparisons and so forth. But as I say, in terms of pointing to a folder on your own computer or to a folder on a shared network drive, that's coming by the end of June.
I want to ask about comparison functionality. So when Recital compares between clauses, is comparison similar to Word's compare feature, or does Recital understand the meaning of the clauses and compare the meanings?
Yeah, let me show you quickly what comparison looks like. As an example here, and you should be seeing a Gmail inbox. Fred has lots of emails with lots of contracts in negotiation. Fred has the Recital add-in for Gmail, and there's a similar add-in for Outlook. And in one click, Fred can get a comparison of the attachment he just received against the prior version. And so here's a red line of that. And then Fred can open this up in Word, which takes us to what we were looking at before, where Fred has the Recital add-in for Word with clause suggestions from his own prior work product or from a clause library. And just back to this red line for a moment, what Recital is doing as part of its contract processing is mapping and grouping together all versions of a contract. So what we're seeing on this page is entirely organized, with data and files grouped together by Recital itself without any manual work from the user. So this is the kind of version history that we talk about that is, again, enabled by Recital's data engine, and which of course makes it super easy to select any two documents and get a comparison.
If you have other questions, let us know. I want to recap the poll, our fourth and final poll, which is what's been most challenging about choosing a contract solution, which is a really interesting question. The vast majority are solutions we've explored are too costly, time consuming to implement. I think it's been really interesting to see how fast you can bring up Recital and get it up to speed. Then 24% say too many vendors. It's hard to evaluate vendors or know what's a fit. That's interesting too. And then we have the budget, but not enough internal resources. And then we're not sure what we need is 15%. So interesting, great data there. Another question, can you export structured data to Excel?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. And we'll wrap up on this.
We've got pricing publicly available on our website. So pricing ranges from anywhere around $10,000 to $40,000, depending on the size of the team. That would be for a team of up to 10 in-house counsel. We've got different pricing for larger organizations as well. And in terms of implementation, what you saw today, in terms of creating your account and getting started, that's pretty much what implementation looks like. And that's a key point to highlight, because that is completely different than any other contract solution on the market, where there's all kinds of upfront work that needs to be done in terms of finding and organizing data, in terms of figuring out workflows, in terms of change management and training. And essentially our mission at Recital is to eliminate all those barriers.
So looking at your site, and I've gotten a couple of questions, private questions about fees, and I see some questions in the chat as well. So just to break it down, because definitely people are interested, and it's a nifty tool. So it looks like there's a platform fee of $10,000 a year, a setup fee of $9,500, and then $125 a year per user. Does that sound about right?
Yeah. So the end result of all of that is for a team of 10 people, it's about 25,000 in annual fees, plus about 10,000 in upfront setup costs.
And in the
But
setup, you would like help map the contracts, make sure the data is coming in appropriately.
it's what you saw today. So it's creating your account, connecting your cloud storage, connecting your email, installing the Recital add-in for Outlook or for Gmail, and installing the Recital add-in for Word. And that kickstarts the process of processing the contracts in the folders that you connect to Recital. So that's the setup, but that happens all automatically. You just need to connect your cloud storage.
And what about business teams that want access to the repository? Are they per user or like how does that work?
Yeah, we provide access for what we call read-only users. That could be sales reps, could be finance, could be others. And the price there is about $240 per user per year. So the intent is to make that very inexpensive so that the entire business can get value from Recital. I know one of the challenges with contract solutions is the per user pricing, especially for teams where it's really only accessing the system to search or to find contracts, as opposed to more power users in the legal department. So our pricing approach there is to make it as easy and inexpensive as possible to give access to Recital for as many people in the business as you want. We always recommend highly an initial onboarding call, which can be 15 to 30 minutes with your team, where we go through exactly what I showed in the demo today.
Okay.
So we want to make sure that people are successful, that they've connected their cloud storage and their email correctly. So absolutely, we support teams in getting started as quickly as possible.
All right. Free trial. No better time to start than now. All right. We will wrap up here. Martin, and or I guess I'll go to Stephen first. Stephen, any last words, final remarks before we sign off for the day?
No, I think very well produced, Shai. Great to join in.
Awesome. And Martin, final words.
Thank you. Always a pleasure. And I love doing these sessions with you. And
All
a
right.
big thank you to Stephen for joining us as well today. I think he brought some very unique perspectives on the challenges, not just from the legal department, but from other teams within an organization who can get value from contracts.
Love it. Thank you guys. Great job. Great session. Thank you, Recital. Thank you to our wonderful chat IHC for with their great participation and questions. Looking forward to more webinars and events. And again, my friends in Boston, if you're out there, I hope to see you soon. And otherwise, have a wonderful Tuesday. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining.